How y'all doing?
Hello.
Good. Welcome to the first panel, y'all. As you can see, we got a full house. That's cool. So we're gonna rock with what we got here. We're still gonna take this panel and we're just gonna maximize it. There's so many gems for each building. I had the privilege of meeting each individual. So we're gonna get into an introduction here pretty soon. But again, the purpose of this panel is to learn about leadership, right, within our own neighbor right here, Seattle, and then also entrepreneurship. And yeah, so we just want to kind of hear your guys' story, and see how you guys got to where you guys are at, and see if you can share your gems with us. But yeah, without further ado, Patrick, we're going to start off with you. Just a quick little introduction. Work your way up to shirt.
Yes, sir. All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Patrick Okocha. I am currently an assistant director of external relations. I'm at Seattle University. I work with the Career Engagement Office, working with employers to bring employment opportunities to SU, and also working with our students to provide coaching and advising and career coaching around professional and career development. But outside of non-career or non-professionally work-related, I also have my own personal brand called StandPat. And StandPat is just really considered more of a lifestyle, like creative, education, activism, all sort of wrapped or combined in one. And it really stems from all of my professional, my academic, and my personal experience. And now venturing into a new sort of phase in my career, being in new rooms, new opportunities, and sort of how do I, in that moment, begin to elevate those who are, come from similar backgrounds as me. So I say I'm an activist, educator first, and this professional second. I think so much of what I do professionally stems from who I am personally. So I'm very excited to tell you a little bit more about myself and the work that I've done.
My name is Key Shane, formerly known as Key. I'm the co-founder of Shore, which is a streetwear brand located in LA. Shore means, it's an acronym, stands for Sovereign Upon Revered Energies. Its main logo is a pine cone, which I meant to bring with me today, but I didn't bring a pine cone. I had a perfect one. The pine cone represents your pineal gland, which is located in the center of the brain, right above the hypothalamus. In everyone's brain, it's said to be the seat of your soul, your third eye sight. So we pretty much want people to be sure of themselves by opening their third eye and pretty much trusting their inner instinct and their consciousness.
Yeah, my name is Yohanes, co-founder of B.E.N. I'm excited about this first panel. Before we even get started, I really want to start off and shout out to my team, my amazing team. We got Nemo, also co-founder behind the camera. We got Jamila right here, solid person. My boy Brandon up there. Yeah, so let's get this panel started. Oh, Margaret, me too. I appreciate you for giving us some extra Patrick, But yeah, let's get started. So, first question: what are the most important decisions you made as a leader in your organization or business?
I think for me, I remember a very specific date. It was November 25th, 2018. That was the last day that I worked at my previous employer. It's called the Washington State Opportunity Scholarship. I was a program officer supporting STEM and healthcare students across the entire state of Washington who would receive $22,000 renewable scholarship. So it was a difficult moment because I was at this sort of place in my career in which I'm now sitting in meetings with the president of Microsoft, Brad Smith, and co-founder of Costco, Jim Sinegal. And you think about sort of being in these rooms, and I remember a board meeting, and I'm in the Microsoft executive conference room, and I'm in this board meeting. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm the only one like me in here. And on one hand, I could look at it and go, wow, this is really great, right? But on the other hand, I was thinking, this is lonely at the same time, right? I think a lot about Harriet Tubman, right? And you're probably thinking, what does Harriet Tubman have to do with this? So when I think about Harriet Tubman, I'm like, what made Harriet Tubman great was the fact that she made it to freedom. What made her iconic was the fact she came back. So when I think about my career, I was like, what does this mean to me if I'm in these spaces and no one else here is like me, right? I'm having to meet people over and over again, right? And I go, I don't typically in my personal life have to introduce myself multiple times because I typically leave an impression when I think about, right, you're on a scale of president of Microsoft or the co-founder of a Fortune 500, Fortune 50 company, probably thinking they meet thousands of people regularly, right? What impact does sort of I have? So I began to think about, right, who is to succeed those individuals, right? Who's to come after? I'm like, that's who I want to get connected with. And I'm going, there's a level of disconnect that I was not having. I'm like, it's cool, but I was like, being behind the desk is cool for some people, but for me, I was like, I like to be in the field. That's where all of my experiences stem from. So in 2018, I gave my employer a month notice, and I told them that I was leaving the organization. The only thing is I didn't have a backup plan. And I remember like having to have some very difficult conversations with myself and say, if you're going to leave this position with no backup plan, then whatever it is that you find, I hope it's worth it. March 25th, 2019 is when I started my first day working at Seattle University as the assistant director of career engagement at the time. And who would have thought? I went from leaving as a program officer, right, scholar success advisor, quit on the whim, to then going into a director role in my next subsequent role. So for myself, entrepreneurship individually, that was one of the biggest risks that you can take, is to bet on yourself. But I had to reflect. I looked at my previous roles and I'm going, I've been fortunate and grateful to have organizations or work in places in which there've been a name recognition behind it. I've worked at the Seattle Times for 5 years. I worked for the University of Washington. I worked for National Nonprofit Year Up. I worked for the Washington State Opportunity Scholarship, and then now I'm currently working for Seattle University. So I said, a lot of the times I was aligning my own personal, professional achievements based off of where I was working. I was like, I work for UW or I work for Seattle Times. Like, there's a level of respect and decorum you're gonna have by just having that experience on your resume. But I thought to myself, I was like, to me, there's something more than that. And I think about, now being able to work at a school like Seattle University in my own capacity, really betting on myself, and I made a promise to myself after that day. I said, when I left on November the 25th, I said, I'm never gonna be in a position in which I'm not myself. I didn't do this so that I can go and then be someone I'm not. So that was one of the biggest things that I've done for my own personal self, entrepreneurship, taking control of my career.
Any question when you're talking?
So the question is what are the most important decisions you made as a leader in your organization / your realm of work?
Okay. I feel like the most important decision I made as an entrepreneur is making less items so that I can focus more on the quality. That's really important to me because, just being a kid growing up, I was always fascinated by how when I would go thrift, I would find these like dope pieces, and I was like, man, I want to recreate this, and I want it to last as long as this piece lasted. And so, just putting out less items, and even though there was higher demand, it just made it a lot more exclusive, which is something I really always wanted to create, because we all looked up to the Supremes and the Stussies and the Hundreds, Bobby Hundreds. So just being able to focus more on the quality was super important to me. It was really a shift in the brand because we got to be able to be more hands-on with the pieces, be more focal, make each piece mean something, and makes it more personable when you're able to touch each piece and know that you put your all into it, and the quality is the best that you can put in. So yeah, high quality.
Solid response, yo. Solid response for sure. Imagine you went deep, man.
Just started.
Just
Yes, sir. I'm eating off him too.
Encourage that. So, when you guys are into your organizations, you guys come across being creative, right? So when you guys are dropping a project or if you're creative thinking has to come into play, right? Key, we were talking about this the other day. So my question to you is, how do you, what does it take to be a creative thinker? That's something that's extremely difficult. Some people have that gift to be very creative and be able to drop a project right away off the dome. Other people, it's taxing, it's difficult. So what encourages your creative thinking? How do you do it?
So this is something that I have, I would say, a very personal connection and passion for. I was an English major at the University of Washington. So when you think about English, major, college, there's a lot of preconceived notions about what it means to major in English, right? Or to graduate with an English degree. What are you going to use for an English degree? Are you going to work at Starbucks? I used to get that joke. So I'm not going to work at Starbucks. Thank you. You're going to be a teacher? No. You're going to law school? Thought about it, right? A lot of English majors go to law school. It's one of the top pre-law, right? Law's an open field, right? It's one of the academic disciplines that sends a lot of students into that field. And when you think about why they send a lot of English majors into the law profession, is the ability to critically think and analyze. It's to interpret anything and to draw a connotation or connection based off of the context around it. So for me, one thing I realized as an English major at the University of Washington, I said, I wanted to utilize English, to your point, to be more creative in my thinking, right? And I think for me, one thing that I had realized was when I would be in these classes and I'm reading William Faulkner, I'm reading all these, what they consider historical writers, right? And I'm reading the text, I'm reading the context, I'm going, I don't really connect with the narrative itself. I was like, I don't understand the context, but when we break it down, there are human elements that you can personally relate to. Think about empathy, grief. These are all things that as human we experience, and we all have a personal connection, just the way in which it shows up is different. So I'll be reading these books and I'm reading these classes, I'm going, oh, that person's heartbroken. But the context that was situated didn't allow for me to, just off of first impression or glance, to connect that. So the more and more I would take English classes, I'm being able to realize when you read something, you gotta look at the context in which it was created. That was half of what my program was about, is that we would look and go, okay, the Harlem Renaissance influenced Langston Hughes, right? It was not the converse. It was lived experiences in which writers were telling what was going on. Much as you think about the current mainstream, right? Hip hop, rap culture comes from telling stories that are in these communities. That's what writing is. You write from a frame of reference. So the second that I began to realize, how do you connect with people through narrative? That's one thing that's always sort of stuck with me. And I think about creativity. And I want to make sure I give a shout out to Sean Wong, who was one of my former professors at the University of Washington. He's actually a pioneer of Chinese American literature. He was a longtime chair of the University of Washington's English department. I remember taking a class with him in the middle of like the bottom of the art building. And yeah, because as an English program, we don't have our own building. We don't, we gotta find where we can, where we can get in. Right? So I'm taking this class in like the bottom of like some random cafe. And I remember I come in and Professor Wong, like he has this Craigslist ad like pulled up onto the screen. I'm just like, buying cars? Like what are we what are we doing? Why is this pulled up? And I remember at that time he had us like read the description of the listing. And I remember just reading it off and we broke it, we parsed it, we broke it apart. And he essentially, the takeaway was that you're able to draw a connection based on how this individual has spoke and messaged this product, that they're not selling it, right? That they're giving it away. And he said, if you want to think about the best writers, the best storytellers, those are the ones who can communicate or convey an emotion without ever directly stating it. When you read something and someone says that the person angrily said or begrudgingly did, you're shortchanging the reader experience. You create the context around it and you allow for the reader to then put themselves in that space. So when you think about creative thinking, is how do you begin to allow for people to interpret and to be able to think creatively? I think ingenuity, innovation has stifled creativity. Now people are more so resharing than contributing original thoughts. And that's part of the reason I left social or left Facebook initially, because I remember a time in which I'm like, these are just people reposting other people's thoughts. And half of these aren't even really credible. So you think about where is the originality in your thought process and your thinking. I'm going, that is what could be my selling point, because in a time in which ingenuity and innovation is increasing, creativity is being stifled. And I think I can take advantage, not take advantage, that sounds disingenuous. I think I can maximize this opportunity.
How do I encourage creative thinking? I thrift a lot, so the theme of my brand is modern vintage. So, a lot of my brands, kind of talking about recreate. A lot of my designs are recreations of the past, which I don't really have a big problem with, because it's important for me to push out like that vibe, that 90s feel that I'm trying to give off. And so I do make it as original as possible, but thrifting, just making sure I am sure of myself, and kind of just living life and not forcing anything, letting it come to me naturally. That's really important when, in the creative process. Don't force anything, just let it come natural, because it's more felt, it's more, how can I place it? It's better that way. So the more natural, the better. When I create, it's usually me and my business partner just bouncing ideas off of each other, critiquing each other, trying to get the best design we possibly can, and that's how we come up with a lot of great things. And so just being able to have a partner that I can relate to, it's important. Just having someone who thinks just like you do, it does help. Even being a business owner, people think it's all one man, but no, I have a whole team that helps me create, that are different from how I am. So it just gives me that insight, it gives me perception, and it helps me create.
I appreciate you guys for sure. We live in a society now where we're faced to be like conformed, right? So it's like it's difficult to see leaders out nowadays, and when you do see leaders, they're looked at as kind of the odd ones or the strange ones. So my question to you as leaders, right? That's what you guys are. You guys are leaders and pioneers within your own brand and organizations. What are some of the biggest challenges facing leaders today?
Start with me. The biggest challenge facing leaders today, I know as a creative, I do get kind of caught up in my own, I tend to just block the noise and just kind of just have one straight and narrow path. So just being able to help other brands, and that's super important as brand owners, that we work together and we support each other, because that's the only way that we could make it. So I feel like that's very important. Trying not to fully block everyone out, and just being open ears and listening to other brand owners, giving tips that you think could be useful for their brand, whatnot. And so I feel like it's important that we stick together as Black entrepreneurs and support each other in any way that we possibly can. I feel like that's super important. I feel like that's kind of the only problem as leaders that we have. We tend to not support each other as much as we should. Yeah, that's my perception.
I think for me, the biggest thing that I would express is that you should never expect or anticipate to be misunderstood. You should prepare for it. It's inevitable, right? And I think about that. You think about, I do a lot of research, because I think knowledge and the information that's out there is very critical towards creating and understanding a paradigm around possibility. So I was just kind of drawing apart, I remember seeing or hearing a stat of how few players in high school end up going off to play in the professional ranks, or go off to play in the collegiate ranks. And I think that what's interesting when you think about that 1 or less than 1%, we hear that a lot, right? We hear the 1%, but mostly attached to finances, right? People who are the most rich. But one thing I realized that you think about population of people in the United States who have a PhD, which is the highest form of education, right, that one can attain here. Only less than 2% have a PhD, right? I went and crunched numbers a little bit, and I saw that there have been over 15,000 men to suit up for an NFL team. And as of 2019, there are 329 men who are enshrined in the Hall of Fame. Numbers-wise, that's 1.4% of every NFL player has made it into the Hall of Fame. So when you think about, right, the Hall of Fame, right, there's no Hall of Very Good, right? There's no Hall of You're Almost There, right? There's a Hall of Fame, a Hall of Transformation. Right? There's only one person, to my knowledge, who has a birthday individually dedicated to themselves in the United States. That's Dr. Martin Luther King. So as you reflect back, and I had to learn history, I can remember the legendary team. You can remember the Chicago Bulls that won 6 championships, the Lakers that three-peated, right? So who won the championship in 1983? Philadelphia 76ers, right? They're a good team, but you don't remember them because that's not. You think about Hall of Fame. Hall of Fame is something in which you cannot tell the history of that sport, art, craft without that person being mentioned. It'd be like talking about the NBA and not mentioning Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan, right? It's like you can't talk about the NBA like that. So when I think about trying to create that pathway, I'm just like, yeah, in that process, people are not going to understand what you're doing. That's 99% of the population. That's what I'm talking about. There's only reason only 2% of the population has a PhD. There's a reason why only 1.4% of all NFL players have made the Hall of Fame. It's less than 2%. It's in the 1%. So when you think about what is going to make a difference for you, realizing that your difference is probably part of that 1% if you really want to be great. And when you think about being 1 out of 100, no one's going to understand you. You have to be comfortable doing that if you want to be creative and you want to inspire, right?
Great response, y'all. So we all want to be great here, right? We all want to be somebody. We all want to do big things. Patrick, we talked briefly about the importance of stepping back from work and to really self-reflect on like what you've done, right? I kind of want to talk about that, the importance of that, and the importance of goal setting. So what is the importance of stepping back, looking at all your work you're doing, reflect on it, and then also goal setting for like what you want to continue to do, or like what's the next step? How important is that when getting to your future endeavors, future business goals, whatever?
Start going off. I want to hear what you want to say. I'm interested.
I think for me, and this is where I will plug my institution, my employer. For me, I think reflection is something that's very vital to not only your professional but your personal development. Right? Think about even personal relationships. One of the hardest things you can do in a relationship is say I'm sorry, right? Because that's to be reflective upon self and realize this is the ownership that I have in this. Right? It's very easy to point fingers and cast assertion on someone else, but to be reflective upon your own self, that's the hard part. So when you think about your career and you start working, you start acquiring these titles, you start making these changes, making these impacts. I had an impact in my personal, life, and that in part influenced my career. Right, I was at this sort of, turning point in my life personally, and I was just like, man, realize how much time you spend around people you work with. Right, spending 40+ hours a week with individuals. More time statistically than any other relationship in your life. So when you think about things that are impacting you outside of work, it's very hard to show up and work 8 hours a day when you're holding on to things you don't have an outlet to speak upon or talk to, right? But again, as I mentioned earlier, we're all empathetic, we all can experience grief, but again, there's a certain connection that you have when people can understand exactly what you're going through, right? You don't have to over-explain because that exerts additional energy. So when I think about sort of that, I had to be reflective and go, okay, what is my ownership, not only in my personal life, but my career? What is it that I'm going to do that's going to make an impact for the rest of my life? I'm like, is it going to be the quest or the chase for a title? Is it going to be the chase for money? Like, what happens when you hit that, right? As I walk through college campuses, and I would look at, I would see the names. I'm like, who's this building named after? Right? We just kind of walk into buildings, right? They're named after some individual. I'm like, how did this person get this building? Some individuals pay for it for sure, but it's like for the most part, I like to know the history around like why the building was named after that person. Typically, they made an impact. Right? Think about Vi Hilbert at Seattle University, right? It's just a residence hall to some students, but I'm like, no, she's a legacy, she's a pioneer in the state. You don't know the history. Educate yourself. When you walk in these buildings and you see these names, right? They have history attached to it. How do you reflect upon that? So coming to an institution, working for Seattle University, I was a little skeptical growing up in Seattle and not knowing much about Seattle University. I went to the University of Washington. So I was hearing about social justice as I was looking for jobs. This is like during those 3 months I didn't have a job. I came across this position at SU, and I remember hearing connection to social justice and going, I don't know anything about SU and its connection and relevance to social justice. How does that equate? But then I remember I was at a recent event where they're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the opening of the Office of Multicultural Affairs at Seattle University, which was created in 1970. 2 years after the University of Washington's Office of Minority Affairs and Diversity was established, 1968. You think about what happened in 1968, a very famous person lost their life, was assassinated. Dr. Martin Luther King. Students at the University of Washington were fed up. Why are there not equal resources and opportunities for students at this institution? So they, as students influenced in part by the Black Panthers, they're like, we tried the nonviolent way, you guys killed Martin Luther King, so we're not asking, we're demanding. And they sat and they protested Charles Beauregard, who was the president at the University of Washington. Now the library is named after him. If you ever know what's Beauregard Library mentioned, you know the history, why buildings are named after people, because there's a history attached to it. Charles Beauregard was the former University of Washington president. They protested in his office saying, we need equal opportunities. That public demonstration brought in the National Guard to pull those students out of the classroom. So you think about the optics. People are seeing what is going on at the University of Washington. That public shame, I would say almost, influenced them to create the Equal Opportunity Program, EOP, which ultimately influenced the Office of Minority Affairs and Diversity being created. So I knew that history. I already kind of knew that because I used to work on what they say, talk about sort of that fighter, that activist, trope. So I was just like, for me growing up in Seattle, I was like, oh my, you guys were created 2 years later? How does that, tell me about that in that time frame. And one thing that was really that stood out to me is that they said as students at Seattle University back in the 60s, the feedback that we got was that we were not militant enough. They said the students at the University of Washington, they saw the public act of demonstration. SU, what is your response? The campus is less than 5 miles apart. What they told me, they said as students at that time, there was Father Henry McGoldrick, who was the president overseeing the university at SU. They said because they teach about Jesuit social justice, they're able to work alongside administration because the demonstrators saw their humanity and they cared for them as people. So they were able to work from within to create the Office of Multicultural or Minority Affairs at that time. So you think about two offices being established less than 2 years apart and the context around it. I'm going, we identify publicly with one, but not the other. So I said, does anyone really know this history? I'm going, what is social justice, right? Social justice is the redistribution of wealth and resources within a community or society. So it's to take knowledge, resources, and to pass it on to others. Social justice, socially just. But when you're taught to care for other people, how do you reflect upon your own self? Right? When you're literally taught we teach you to do service to society. You don't think about your own personal connection to it. So one thing I had to learn about being at SU is that there's a gentleman named St. Ignatius of Loyola, who's one of the founding fathers of the Jesuit faith. And as an aside, I'm not Jesuit, I'm not Catholic, but I'm a student, so I'm always kind of learning. I want to be intrigued by the connections of things. But St. Ignatius of Loyola, right, who we have a chapel on our campus dedicated to, he had this spiritual exercise called examen of conscience. It's to analyze and discern one's own action in relation to how you serve other people. You guys have heard the concept, you can't pour from an empty cup. You can't get what it is that you don't have. How do you feel yourself in relation to going into also inspiring other people? You gotta reflect. So what's interesting, if you ever at Seattle University's campus, right next to the chapel is a pool. It's called the reflection pool. Because you have to reflect and think about what it is that you're doing. If you don't, you will have no clue on where it is that you're going. I didn't realize my connection to social justice until I look back at all of my roles and go, oh, these have all had connections to helping people. I didn't see the threat at that time, but I had to look back and reflect. And it's not going to be something that's intentional. You have to create space for it. No one's going to do it, especially once you start working.
Goal setting is important because it helps to align your focus. You get to see, you get to hold yourself accountable. You get to see what you want to, knock out throughout the year. Like I recommend highly that every business, everybody, any entrepreneur, just get a yearly calendar and just write down all their goals for the year. So you're holding yourself accountable. And you're knocking out your goals, as it goes by. So as the year goes by. So it's very important. And like I said, I highly recommend if you're not goal setting that you start today. It's never too late to goal set. You can start anytime. So yeah. Short answer to your
I'm actually going to go back to you actually.
Okay.
Because I think your brand is so dope. Like everything that you're doing, where it's
appreciate it.
Yeah, where it's coming from, like the story behind it. Like we talked briefly about it. But like you were saying earlier, like you got people that really want your clothing. Like
Yeah.
you really got people really waiting for you, right? And like you said earlier, like you're producing quality work.
Yeah.
So my question to you is like, how important is it to like kind of really sit back and just like self-reflect about just like, okay, like I see how my brand is doing, you know what I'm saying? Like appreciate it, but then also like kind of deliver what people want.
It's tough, man. I got people always coming up to me, asking how and when can they get gear, and I just try to keep cool and calm composure because I do have like a personal life, and I just got to make sure I take care of that before I execute what I want with the brand. So to your point, it's not easy, man. As much as I want to mass produce and get stuff out there, I got to handle my life business, and I'm getting really close to being fully 100%, working on the brand, which it is 100%. I do think about it all day, every day, but just working on myself and just becoming truly who I am and finding myself is super important to me. So making sure that I know truly who I am, being sure of myself, even though I have a brand called Sure, I'm not 100% sure, which is a horrible thing to say, but I see myself, I see my vision clearly, and I see myself becoming more of a man every day. And so, I'm patient with myself, and I'm patient with people, and I'm patient with putting out product because I know that eventually everybody's gonna be able to have something. So just having patience, man, it's tough, and you have to learn that the hard way, but that's the biggest thing right there, just being able to wait and know that what you do, when you do put something out, that people will be satisfied with what you do put out.
I think one thing that is important is that brands can be aspirational, right? Like, I think that's part of the power in branding is the story behind it. Right? You're speaking about the pineal gland, right? The intricacies to the work that it is that you do. When I think about Nike, right? Anyone can have a slogan, right? Anyone can say something, right? But what made even sort of Nike revered was the fact that they live the credence of your model. I'm trying to say they're like your model. Just do it, right? And when I think about even my first initial connection where I can draw, like I always kind of do the check, right, growing up. But when I learned about or saw Michael Jordan, and I'm going, he came in as a rebel. That's in part what launched the Jordan line was the B.E.N ones. Was that NBA was mandating, hey, you have to have a certain level of, you have to have these color. He's like, nah, Nike's like, I will pay, right? I will pay your fees that entire season for you to tell your story. And you think about those who maybe have been rocking with Nike since 1984, or even prior to that, right, when it was a running shoe mainly, right? You think about people who have literally grown up with Michael Jordan, right? Grown up with Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, right? Seen them as youth. That's the brand, right? It's the aspirations. It's like, I want to follow that person's journey because I believe that it's genuine and what you're leading me towards, I can get along, I can get in line with. And that's what I mentioned, earlier about the importance of storytelling. Show, don't tell, right? It's one thing for me, again, to say that this is my brand. It's another thing for me actually to live it. That's what I was taught as an English major. You don't write your emotions, you create the context around it. That's the story, that's the brand, right? So I think about how you've done that. That's literally what branding 101 is having a story, because you're not selling something, right? People try to sell things, and that's where I realized in my career I've never been good at selling. I'm going to give you the real. If you like it, great, but if you don't, I sleep the same way. So that's
I definitely think it's so dope because I actually just finished a book called Talent is Overrated. We were talking about it, but it really talks about how people master their crafts, right? And they put in deliberate hours of practice into whatever field that they're doing and become professionals at it. And just to see like each of you guys, doing your thing, and I think it's really like a prophecy, literally, like you are a master in your craft within your brand because you put in all those hours. You are a master in your education and also all the works that you're doing at Seattle U and what you did at UW. So all it's amazing. So we're gonna go into shows it. But so the next question. So we're living in a day of age with social media. We have our Instagram, our Twitter, huge, massive platforms where a lot of people are using. How important is networking, right? Again, we have so many people using these things. So how does Sure get exposure to these, and then how important is that? But yeah, we'll start with you.
All right. Networking is pretty important, but I don't think it's the most important thing that you have to worry about. I feel like people do get too caught up in, I have to network all the time, which it's necessary, but you got to know when to trust and when to open up to people. And that's a big thing that I had to learn because I'm an open book and I pretty much open up to everyone. But I started to realize that people that I did connect with, even though they were successful and they were doing their thing, and I wanted to work with them, they necessarily weren't on board with what I was doing, and so they small talked me, and so I used to rely on certain people to get me where I wanted to be, but I had to learn like I can't really rely on anyone but myself, and so networking, as important as it is, you just got to be careful on who you trust. Be careful on who you open up with because you got to open up to the right people because only certain people can help you and only certain people see your vision for what it is. So it's important, but it's not the most important on my list. Just knowing when is important to me.
For sure.
I think for me, a lot of people get the fame before the success. So I think that social media is a very tricky realm to navigate. I've seen individuals who have perpetuated a life in which they are not living. That goes without saying, right? But to kind of see the personification of how other individuals interpret that person's being is what is alarming to me, right? So one thing, it's a self-esteem if you feel the need to portray yourself in a life in which you're not leading. Like that has nothing to do with me, right? But the fact that other people's align and find value in that is what's I feel like detrimental for society, is that success is not, you're not actually seeing the ways in which success is achieved. And I think about sort of the progression of any entity, right? And I always find it even interesting in like pop culture when like a group of individuals become exposed to something and they think it's a new experience for the first time. I remember in particular, again, I love music. One of the things that like really give me life, and because of that, I'm always trying to think about music or experience it. So I'll find music in all kinds of places. And I remember even like maybe 10 years ago or so, I came across rapper Skepta. It was UK music at the time. It was a different cadence, different tempo, different swag, right? And I remember I'm listening to Skepta. This is back in like the mid 2015, late 2000s.
And I remember going, this is different. And then I remember he dropped his album Konnichiwa, which won a Mercury Award, was really revered, really brought that energy into the United States where people like Drake and other individuals were then able to blow it up. But it's funny how people were like talking about Skepta like he was new on the scene, like you heard this new, I'm like, he has been around. It was like you are just becoming aware of him, but he's been grinding for years. It's not the same as a rapper who puts out, or artist who puts out a song who just blows off of this, and then it's just like, that person is here today and gone tomorrow, and I'm just like, that's how people, that's the wave of the current, is that we live in this very popcorn, generation in which 2 minutes, boom, all right, what's next? And when you think about how am I gonna sustain that, right? People having to innovate themselves, having to stay relevant, having to do things to keep them into the front of everyone's mind versus just do what you do and then people will sing your praises. You don't need to go out there and say how great you are. Let people do it for you, right? So I realized, and I was trying too hard to, and I think about, again, Harriet Tubman. I like to draw analogies and I'll point back to things, right? Again, what made Harriet Tubman great was the fact that, not even the fact that she brought more slaves to freedom. It's the fact that maybe there was no social media. She didn't do it for social media. She didn't do it for the gram, right? She's not doing it for Twitter. She did it because she's like, I want to generally help these individuals and leave I don't think she was thinking about legacy at that point. She was just like, I want to personally help people. And I think about those individuals. Those are the ones that I typically align myself with, not the ones who have a following, because I'm going, most of the time it's not even a genuine engagement. I don't have fans. I'm not a fan. No one's fan. I'm a peer. I'm a colleague. Fandom is to elevate somebody else. I was like, you're not above me. You have the same emotions, the same feelings. So I never get starstruck, unless it's by somebody who I really revere in my craft. But what is fame? What is fame to me? As that's what I really deduce, is that it's all fiction. It's not fact.
That's dope. So we're in our professional fields, right? I can speak for myself. Mentorship is huge. Like I don't think I would be where I am at today if it wasn't for my mentors, right? My academic mentors, my spiritual mentors, all of my mentors. They all played a huge, significant part in my life. And I'm sure you guys have significant people that got you to where you guys are at. So who were your mentors?
My mentors. Honestly, I read this question. I was like, I'm not even gonna freestyle this one. So, my mentor is two people. One person I look up to is Pharrell. Just his swagger. Not even just what he does, just how he moves with his family. How he's not a messy guy. You don't hear anything negative about him, and you always see him smiling or happy. And just him being just an all-around, just talented dude, songwriter, brand owner, entrepreneur, executive producer. I felt like that dude, he's someone who influenced me majorly growing up. Just off his style alone. I wanted to be just like Pharrell. I skated. I did all these things just to, I thought I looked like him a little bit when I had the little roller band. And so I tried to embody that, and I wanted to be Pharrell. But then as I got older and I started getting more hands-on with the brand and stuff, I started to revere Dapper Dan, the legend, you know what I mean? So I saw that, I read up on him and I saw that he was all hands-on, and I'm like, man, that's so dope. Like, I want to be able to be more hands-on with my brand. And just how personable he is, and he sits down, he makes personal pieces for just that person. That's originally how I wanted to do my brand, but things just changed. But I'm gonna get there eventually. But just the culture of what he brought to New York, being able to start from nothing and then become this guy who's actually working for Louis Vuitton is just amazing. The story is just super influential to me. So those are two guys that those are my guys.
And I honestly did all that because Dapper Dan and Pharrell have definitely had a huge impact on the aesthetic of how I choose to present myself. So I definitely want to make sure I acknowledge that. But to be honest, this is probably the most personal and most, I don't know, this question hits me a little bit differently, and I want to make sure that in this moment, that I really pay homage and honor those who have mentored, who have provided support in my journey. This kind of stems from, I was on LinkedIn a few days ago, and I was just kind of scrolling through my connections, literally looking through my list and just seeing, just kind of checking out a couple of my peers' profiles. And what was so enlightening and amazing to me is to see the diversity of success amongst my personal, professional connection. And the reason I say that is because I remember sort of growing up and looking on the TV to see individuals who look like me and working in just regular roles, right? Like seeing doctors, seeing lawyers, judges, attorneys, right? I'm going, yeah, we had the Cosbys, right? You had shows,
Yeah.
you had characters, right? You didn't have an overall representation that lets you know of your possibilities. So, that's why for the most part, a lot of individuals, especially that look like us, feel like the only option is to go into the entertainment or athletic realm, right? To be a sports, to be entertained. And I would say if that's what you want to do, absolutely, because that's you should pursue your dreams. But to know that you can do more than that, if you are interested, that's available to you. But what's great to me is that I'm looking at my connections on my LinkedIn, and I'm seeing this person is a college administrator now, this person is an attorney, and I'm going, who said that there couldn't be a micro-Polynesian healthcare professional? Who says there cannot be an Hispanic engineer, or there aren't Hispanic engineers? I said, I have them in my personal network. So as I'm talking to students, and they're like, I want to go into this field, I'm just like, they're there. They are. And I've been privileged enough in my career to now be in a space in which I can go, it's real, it's a possibility, it's not a farce. But I wouldn't have gotten to these spaces if it wasn't for those individuals who supported me along the way. So I want to make sure I acknowledge and affirm them, because they are the individuals, as I think about even the civil rights movement. There was Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, right, Malcolm X, but there was also Claudette Colvin, Ella Baker, Fannie Lou Hamer, right? There are people who had a heartbeat, a pulse on the movement, but maybe you're not in the history book. So this is the only time in which you're gonna give people their roses while they can smell them, let them know how much you mean, right? So I want to thank a few. I want to start off by thanking Solange Rayner. She was one of my editors at the Seattle Times, and she was a woman in which I was at the Seattle Times for 4 years, and I watched my peers be given opportunities that I was just literally waiting on sideline for. And at that time, I didn't really know how to advocate for myself, because I was the only person who looked like me. And to be honest, I was very disappointed to find out that some of the reporters who I really looked up to at the Times didn't really didn't find value and wanted to connect with an inspiring young journalist of color. But Solange Rayner sent me to my first game and said, I want you to get your own clips I want you to have a byline in the Seattle Times. And she said it so matter-of-factly. I was like, wait, I can do this? I can go right? To this day, I have my first byline in the Seattle Times because of Solange. And I want to thank her for that. Dr. Relina Joseph, my professor, which is my honored thesis advisor at the University of Washington, African-American woman, amazing. Influenced me so much when I studied abroad in Barbados with her. It was a motherly figure that I had outside of my mother, who is in California, and has been a huge part of my professional career. Then I also want to thank, there have been men in my life, it's not only women that have impacted me. I was like, there have been men. And then I also want to thank Dr. Ed Taylor. He is the Dean of Undergraduate Affairs, the Vice Provost at the University of Washington. He was the first time that I seen a college administrator who was black. Played basketball at Gonzaga for John Stockton, and has a really interesting story. And he's been at UW for a long time, and he's one of the heads up there. If you just see him around campus, he's tall, but he's unassuming. He doesn't feel the need to be all up in the videos. He's just like, I just want to serve students, and it's been a big impact in my life. And then the last one I want to sort of thank is not someone who I've met a couple of times, so I don't have a personal relationship with, but hopefully maybe one day it'll happen. And it's Dr. Michael Eric Dyson. I met him for the first time in Selma. Was there for the 50th anniversary of Bloody Sunday. Stood up 7 hours to watch President Obama speak to the nation, where 50 years marchers were beat on the bridge trying to get the right to vote. And On the way back home to Seattle, we actually were on the same flight, and we connected in the Phil Jackson Airport in Atlanta, of all places, right? So we're on the same flight, and I come up and I see Dr. Dyson. I'm just like, I don't know how much you know what you mean to me. I first came across you in the CNN Black in America series, and you are such an orator, and you are ignorant and intelligent, and that's what I aspire to be.
Yeah.
I aspire to be ignorant and intelligent, right? So I then, I was fortunate when I came to SU. Man, what a interesting thing life is. Seattle University, April, again, I started March 25th, 2019. In April, they bring Michael Eric Dyson to speak to students for the Mission Day. And I said, I'm going to make my way down and let him know that I have his phone number in my phone. He gave me his number in Soma, and I showed it to him. I was like, Dr. Dyson, it's not the first time I'm meeting you. I said, I met you in Selma, and we talked, and you gave me your number, and I showed him his number. He's like, yeah. I was like, I want you to know it's not gonna be the last time you see me. So just remember that. And I think sort of that, like, I wouldn't have even been in a privileged position to say that if it wasn't for those individuals who I named earlier, right? And I think about narrative story. It's not about the destination, it's about the journey. How did you get there? What is your story? What is your brand, right? If they were to look at me and just say, oh, look, he's talking to my career, versus do you know what it took for me to get into a position to speak and to be in the same space with him? That's the value that I have in my entrepreneurship mindset, to realize that I am the controller of my own destiny. I'm going, yes, I work for these organizations, but I did the work. I have earned the right to be and celebrate myself as such. Mentors allow for you to get that frame of reference, because sometimes you don't see your own greatness. And it wasn't until somebody took a step and said, you know what, Pat, I want you to hold your breath. Pat, I see your greatness. Told me that in my eyes, and I was just like, no, I just want to just say that to you. I see your greatness, and that has always stuck with me. So that's what I always try to tell students and anyone that I work with, that I never want to change you. I just want to make you the best version of yourself. And I want you to own who you are. Right? I want you, anything that you think that you want to do, why you own yourself back? Just do it.
Drops mic. But thank you guys so much for coming out to this panel. This one is really special and sincere. Unfortunately, we didn't lose nobody, but there was gonna be two other guest speakers from headquarters, but unfortunately, the conditions we're dealing with right now. But this was definitely meant to be. I think this was definitely destined just to hear about your guys' two stories. It's truly amazing. It's admirable. Like, I respect you guys for what you guys are doing. Appreciate it. Like, yeah, for sure. We thank you guys so much. You guys can give your guys, a little shout out to your brand, your Instagram, whatever. Yep. Thank you guys for real. Thank you.
You guys got any questions? All right. Sure.p.h, Instagram, Twitter, sure_p_h. You guys want to follow me? My Instagram is sure.key. Tap in with the brand. If you have any questions, you know where I'm at, Nike Seattle, right there on Pike and Third.
Yeah, we here, baby. We here.
6.
You don't want to go to
So I think if you ever want to find me, just walk onto Seattle University campus. It's located in Capitol Hill. We're on 12th Avenue. Please just, we are trying to create an awareness around the possibility of greatness at the institution. Being that I have been facing a community or a level of stability in a quickly changing environment, I think within that I'm able to sort of tell the histories and tell the stories, right? I think that contextualizes everything. So the thing about me is I want to make sure I tell more stories, and I want to elevate the power of the narrative. It's been one of the most impactful things. There's not been a greater gift that I've ever received in knowledge, right? So if you ever want to educate yourself on the work that I'm doing, you can go on my website, patrickokocha.com. Okocha is OKOCHA.com. and I will kind of shout out something. So I have this small project that I'm working on called Diverse Perspectives.
and it allows for professionals across different industries and sectors to share out or write your own op-ed articles around identity and career or professional development. And it's something in which I want for you to tell your own story, because as I learned, professional stems so much from personal. And I think that it's very hard to disconnect the two, because that's a job, right? Career is something in which you can grow very much within your working function and also as a person. So I think because of that, you have to be able to evoke certain emotions, so that people can know how to then lead and support. So I'm always looking for writers, I'm always looking for people to, you don't have to be a formal trained writer, you just have to have a thought, you have to have a perspective, and I will be happy to share out others. It's not about me. I always say it's bigger than me. So whatever I can do to promote others, that's what I'm more about. So if you do want to find me, I'm at Seattle.
Sir.
For sure, y'all. Thank you so much.
All right.